Oh, good. I'm glad we didn't record that part. In case you get in trouble.
Okay, it's a hot mic now. Literally a hot mic. We have 2 more minutes. And we really, 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 really appreciate you both, you making time, and you too, Sophia. It really meant a lot.
Thank you, Sophia.
We're up to 153, 154 people. Wow, 150. Yes, we know we're live. I'm just counting in the participants. That's amazing.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Clea Mahoney raised her hand. You can put something in the chat if you like, I think.
Wait, but I thought we're using Q&A instead.
Yeah, we're using the Q&A button.
Yeah.
We're using the chat for feelings, and we're using Q&A button for questions.
Okay, sounds good.
So Clea Mahoney raised her hand and she said it was an accident in the chat. So that's okay, Clea, nice to have you. Hello, Aaron Fernando. Start, here we go. Everyone, hi. My name is Betty Ming Liu, and I teach here at the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. Welcome to tonight's panel discussion on confronting anti-Asian hate. The hate was already going on during the pandemic, and what happened on March 16th, the Atlanta massacre that left 8 people dead, including 6 Asian women, 4 Korean, and 2 Chinese, has just put us on some other dimension. We're here to explore what might be going on, what it means, how we can support each other and our communities. We are recording this event, and right now I'm going to put a link in the chat. This is the link you can go to later to view this recording and to learn more about all the stuff we're doing for diversity here at NYU. Now, let me just make sure I send this out to everyone. Oh, here to the attendees, here we go. So now I want to introduce our 3 panelists. We'll start with Sophia Yufei Wang, who is president of NYU's Coalition of Minority Journalists. The coalition was created by both our undergraduate and graduate students with the mission of uplifting BIPOC and LGBTQ students and journalists at NYU. Since we have such a large group and such a mix of backgrounds and interests, we're going to try to make sure we're all on the same page in knowing what the language is. So BIPOC, which was started in social media in 2013, stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Sophia is an undergraduate international student from Hefei, China, who is studying journalism and psychology. She is exploring her passion for social justice in her internship at the New York Legal Assistance Group, and she works in the group's Pro Se Clinic, which helps people who want to represent themselves in federal court instead of hiring lawyers. Sophia graduates in May. Welcome, Sophia, and congratulations on your graduation.
Thank you so much.
We also have Jay Caspian Kang, writer at large for the New York Times Sunday magazine, where he writes about race, culture, and identity. He most recently gave us this intimate profile of Stephen Yun, who a lot of you know him because he had a 7-year run as a zombie on the hit TV series, The Walking Dead. And now he is in the award-winning film Minari, which is about a Korean immigrant dad who becomes a farmer in Arkansas. And just saying that phrase makes me want to cry, because you can imagine the emotion that must be in this film. And Jay brought it all to the profile. Jay also has a new book, The Loneliest Americans, and guess who the loneliest Americans might be as we look around the room, which will be out this fall. He was born in Seoul, South Korea, and immigrated to the United States when he was a little kid. His entry into writing came later in life, during his 20s. His other life was teaching, surfing, and mostly playing poker. Those are his words. Jay is a former civil rights correspondent for Vice News, a founding editor of the ESPN Sports and Culture blog, Grantland, and former news editor at NewYorker.com. In 2012, he published his debut novel, The Dead Do Not Improve. He lives in San Francisco's Bay Area with his wife and daughter. Now we have Michael LUO. He is the editor of the New Yorker's website and writes regularly on politics and media and religion. Previously, he spent 13 years at the New York Times, mostly as an investigative reporter and editor. As an editor, his reporting teams were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize 4 times. He also covered the Great Recession as a national correspondent, reported on 3 presidential campaigns, and did stints in the Washington and Baghdad bureaus. He is a past recipient of the George Polk Award for Criminal Justice Reporting and the Livingston Award for Young Journalists. He lives in New York City with his wife and 2 daughters. And in 2016, just before he left the Times, he wrote an open letter to a woman who screamed at him and his family to go back to China. This letter ran on the front page of the paper, and it was a spark to a national conversation that just blew up about Asian Americans and race. We're gonna watch that video now. And it had this hashtag, this is 2016. And while you're watching this video, we invite you to put in the chat how you feel about this being 2021. What do you feel right now about your life? What are you bringing to this room with us? We wanna open up the space for us to all be together while we watch this video. Just a reminder, you can put those feelings in the chat, and throughout our time together, the chat is for feelings, and you'll see a separate little thing on the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. That's where you'll put your questions later for our panelists. Okay, now let me do the screen share and get this video going. Here we go. Whoa, it'd be nice if we could hear him. Just hold on a second. I have to take it out. I saw that button, which was on mute. Okay, now it's up. Here we go.
Well, side, annoyed by our stroller, yells, "Go back to China."
Wait. Let me do it right. Here we go.
Well-dressed woman on Upper East Side, annoyed by our stroller, yells, "Go back to China. Go back to your fucking country. This is 2016. So I wrote that tweet just after my family and I had that encounter with this woman. And later I wrote an open letter to her that ran on the New York Times website, and we put it on the front page of the newspaper. We asked other Asian Americans to share their own experiences with racial prejudice and hashtag it just like I did. This is 2016. A lot of people did.
So I was leaving the stage door of Mamma Mia, where I'd been working for several years, and was talking to this wonderful, lovely Midwest couple. And after our conversation, they look at me and say, "When did you move to this country? Your accent is almost perfect." And I took a breath, looked right at them and said, "Yeah, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, y'all." So awkward.
My history teacher asked in class, "Is your Chinese name Ching Chang Wang?" I heard all Chinese names sound like that. Hashtag this is 2016.
A man yelled across the street to another group of men, "Hey, you have an egg roll coming your way." This is 2016.
Where do I start? How about this one? Once asked, quote, is your peripheral vision as good as mine? Or better, because you know, your eyes. This is 2016.
Is it true that Asian women have slanted vaginas? This is 2016.
Dating as an Asian male, seeing profiles listing preference as, quote, all American, getting replies like, quote, no chinks. This is 2016.
So this happens in the back of a lift pool. I get inside the car and the guy starts asking me, where are you from? Dreaded question. And I say, I was born in the States, but I lived in Korea for a bit. And he says, wow, your English is so good. And I say, well, I said I was born in the States. And he keeps pushing, saying, but you're so articulate. Your English is impeccable. At this point, I am about ready to tell the Lyft driver to tell this guy to just jump off onto the West Side Highway.
When I was in the US Army, our drill sergeants used to tell us that we're not white, black, yellow, or brown, that we're all Army green. Yet when a fellow soldier called me Private Ching Chang, when a drill sergeant told another fellow soldier that she would kick her butt back to China, and by the way, she's from California, we had to fight to convince them that we were as American as they were, willing to fight, bleed, and die for this country, yet that was the struggle we took on.
Too many for one tweet. And some living in New York City, I still regularly get, go back to China. Hello, China doll. Konnichiwa. This is 2016.
In college, a roommate's girlfriend, she asked me if I spoke Asian. She also asked if I saw everything in widescreen.
Last month, I watched a white man who I consider to be progressive pull back his eyelids to describe Asian people.
When I was 7, my father had to explain the word chink to me because a neighbor had spray painted it on our front steps. I'm Korean.
Late night, packed subway. I brush up against a guy and he screams at me, go fucking make my Chinese food. And like, I don't even like to cook.
My brother comes home and tells me
Did the sound just cut out?
Lost volume.
Oh.
Betty, you have to keep your volume on. It's coming through your computer.
2016.
So Monday at work, I was reading this LUO article, and as I was reading that, timing was too perfect. I got a series of texts from my sister. She was supposed to meet me later. The text read, I just left and filed a report with the police. Walking to the train and this guy follows me and says, hey, I know you. Where are you going? Hey, you fucking Asian chink. Don't walk away from me. I got a $50 bill. I can buy you for the night. Grabbed him by the Chinese pussy. After reading that, I tweeted, I received these texts from my younger sister as I was reading your article. We're first generation Filipino Americans. Hashtag this is 2016.
First of all, I'm a physician, and I've gotten the chance to work in all different parts of the country. The one thing I've noticed, though, regardless of where I work, is that I always seem to be encountering the same question, being, where in the world did you ever learn to speak English so well? If I wasn't looking at you or speaking to you on the phone, I would never think you were Oriental. The question never failed to take me aback, considering the fact that I went to school in Boston, I went to school in Buffalo, New York. So the first thing I ever think of myself as is a New Yorker, not as an Oriental.
Quote, your people are all like this. Man at JFK after I asked him to unblock the security machine. He was playing on his phone.
I went to my college's financial aid office for a scholarship problem. Explained in detail. Guy, quote, so are you an international student?
Doorman, assuming that I'm a delivery guy because I'm holding a plastic bag. This is 2016.
As an Asian American born in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, I sympathize with your situation. Recently, I was walking with my husband of 20 years. He happens to be Jewish. He said to me, I never realized people look at us differently. And I was shocked. I said, are you kidding? Of course we are different. I am different. I am not white. I am a person of color. And the other night at the Taylor Mack concert, Taylor Mack told all the white people in the center section of the audience to go to mimic a whitey flighty to allow people of color to enter the more privileged seats. My husband got up, he turned to me and said, aren't you coming with me? And I said, no, I'm not white. I am a person of color.
A former boss said she always hires Asians because they make the best workers. This is 2016.
Colleagues have asked without malice, when does your work visa end? I was born here. This is 2016.
So this happened in Brooklyn. I was walking to the subway and approaching me, there are two tall young white guys and they stopped me. They started speaking gibberish and sing-song, and I didn't quite know what was going on. And then I heard it, Chinny China, go back to China. And then I knew it was about race. It was not a good feeling, but in a way it was kind of relief because, you know, we named it and I, you know, at least we're talking about it.
Okay, you can, this is let me stop the share. You're all welcome to put your questions in the chat. And we're going to start with a question for our panelists. A lot is happening now. This is 2021. When it was 2020, we had the pandemic, which was already horrible on so many levels, that already weaponized what we look like, our faces. The otherness was everywhere. And now after the Atlanta massacre, there's even more stuff going on. But what is going on? So panelists, can you each give us your thoughts? What is happening right now to the community and in America in terms of anti-Asian hate and anti-Asians in general? Anyone want to take it first?
I guess I can start. I think one thing that's obviously what we're seeing is a culmination of a year or more where you know, we had a president obviously who just kind of reflexively would say Kung flu, Wuhan virus, China virus. He would just say it like over and over again, you know, and definitely people called him out on it, but it kind of just in the sort of the flood of everything that Trump was saying, it wasn't obviously you can't call it out every single time, and so something though that is very hard to measure took hold, and the thing that the thing that I would say about what's happening right now that's a little confusing is we're seeing obviously numbers of a rise in these kinds of attacks. There have been some reports out there that have tried to look at law enforcement data about the rise in hate crimes against Asians. But one thing I would say, as somebody who was used a lot of data as a investigative reporter, is I think it's really hard to quantify what's going on. These numbers, I can't tell how much it is, you know, a true rise in attacks, or that are these things actually happening with greater frequency? Or are they simply being reported with greater frequency? Are they being noticed with greater frequency? But obviously the Atlanta attacks really came at this moment where there was this rising crescendo of awareness about these issues, and have led us to this moment that where I've never experienced a moment like this as an Asian American in this country. It's an extraordinary moment. So much so that I think, you know, walking around on the streets of New York, I remember after the Atlanta attacks, I went to play tennis actually late at night, and I was wondering like if somebody would say something to me about this. It really is a kind of a national moment.
Where do you think it's going to take us, though? Jay, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd mostly, I think I would agree with Mike that part of what's difficult about it is that it is so confusing about what's actually happening, and you have a mix of local and national stories, and then everything gets culminates in what happened, the massacre in Georgia. And so I live in the Bay Area, and the stories to me felt local for a while, but the man, the Thai man who was shoved and was killed in San Francisco, and then another incident in Oakland, and then another incident in Oakland, and these got a lot of press nationally, but it was hard to discern whether or not the sort of reported rise in hate crimes, right, was something. It's just hard to quantify because hate crime statistics, as Mike pointed out, are so bad, right? And then a lot of the places which are doing great work, but they're also counting things like people saying things to people on the street, or people moving across the street or moving away from somebody is also being part of like hate. And so those would never, of course, be counted as hate crimes before. And it's difficult because like you want to point these out, but you also don't want to feel like you're gaslighting a scared population that almost certainly is seeing a rise in something, right? I think that something is happening. And I would be surprised if something wasn't happening, just because we're in a year of a pandemic at this point, and most people think that the pandemic came from China. So, it makes sense that some people would act on that feeling. So, yeah, it's been a lot of confusion and a lack of clarity, I think. But I do think that a lot of, what's been expressed is not necessarily like, oh, I think this is X is happening definitively, but sort of a belief that, well, this is like something is happening, even if we can't clearly articulate what it is. And we would like for people to understand that like Asian people in this country also go through discrimination. They also go through, they're also violently killed, right? And that it seems more to me that what is happening is sort of a reclamation of a space as people of color, which, had been very contested, I think, in the years coming before 2020. Yeah, I think that's what's happening. It's, at least nationally and certainly within media, it is an attempt to reclaim person of color status. And, that comes with both good and bad, I think. But that's just my, it's just my opinion.
I just hear about your opinion. I just put a link in the chat. This is a Pew Research study, March 18th. It just came out. It said majorities of Americans see at least some discrimination against Black, Hispanic, and Asian people in the US. 80% said there is a lot, or at least some against Black people. 76% of discrimination against Hispanics, and 70%, 70, say that Asians are experiencing discrimination too, which I thought was kind of high for Asians. I thought they would say, no, they don't experience anything. And one of my students, Sophia, first, let's hear what you feel.
Yes, so pretty much building up what Mike and Jay have said so far, I definitely felt very confused initially, especially since I saw like most coverages about this kind of hate crimes on Instagram and Facebook actually initially, instead of actually seeing those coverages on like mainstream media publications. So I remember like how I was confused and didn't know whether those anecdotes were real or they were just this kind of like they were just kind of like incidents that were like dramatized and like posted online. So I actually did spent some time like trying to like dig in and do like more fact checking before actually like posting them on my social media platforms, just because I encountered like this kind of situations before. And I feel like ever since I came to study and live in New York, I definitely feel it's very important for me sometimes to kind of like second guess my feelings, just because I was not so sure whether this is something like very new to me or like my feelings were right and I actually need to speak for myself and my community as well. So that's actually, so I would say my initial feelings was a mix of like confusion and also kind of second guessing. And yeah, so I definitely echo with what has been said so far, that like it's going to be very hard to quantify this, especially since what we have gotten so far is more about like the storytelling. So I think more work definitely has to be done in terms of so for example, like the link Betty just shared is a very good starting point, because we actually need to like get more work down and try to use the kind of statistics to actually convince those people who are still like skeptical of what has happened. So yeah.
You know, Sophia, there's something else to ask you. As a Chinese international student, so many of our universities depend on international students because you all pay a lot of money to attend school here. And it's thanks to you, a lot of us have jobs. And because of what Trump and everything that's happened in terms of the relations with China, COVID, all of that, and now this, the anti-Asian hate, how do you and your friends feel about, how do you move around America, or even just New York, which is where you're in right now at NYU?
Yeah, so I would say it definitely has been a tough year for my family and friends who are also like from China. So I still remember like how I got like a flood of messages from my family, like doing this kind of daily checking with me and seeing like asking me like, even before the Atlanta shootings happened, they were just asking me like I heard that like there was a wave of hate crimes against like Asians here now in the US, like whether that was true. And just don't go outside like when it's getting dark because it's unsafe, especially because you're an international student and also like you are a female and blah blah, things like that. So that's how I guess my family reacted to this whole like COVID situation. So I did have conversations with my friends. So I would say in general, we were feeling, I would say honestly, I will feeling kind of like ashamed initially, just because like, because I still remember like how I was riding on the train the other day, going to school. I was actually the only one who was wearing masks back then. And a lot of people like back then in the car were just like staring at me. And I still remember like how a guy sitting right in front of me was like rolling his eyes and was saying something like Chinese government has done this and that, and like you should probably do something, things like that. So I still remember how kind of ashamed I felt back then. So I think, and I think some friends of mine definitely echo with that. So I think that's how I feel. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Yes. And since this is such a unique time, like Mike said, he's never experienced, raise your hand if you've never experienced anything like this before. As journalists, as editors, what do we cover? Do we just go around covering the next hate crime, the next hate crime, the new statistic? What's the vision?
I think I guess I'm the one who runs some sort of directs some sort of coverage at the New Yorker here. Well, I mean, I am very curious about where the story goes next. I think I love what Jay said about how this was a moment of reclaiming the the label of persons of color, and because it is unclear whether that label applies to Asians and Asian Americans. You know, the thing that that the really complicated things that we need to move on to are, so yes, we can all unite around being allies against anti-Asian, you know, hate crimes and these kinds of attacks. It's a really good thing that people are aware that this is a lived reality for people of Asian descent in this country. That's like a big step. So then then you get into complicated questions, the ones that have bedeviled us. Jay's written a little bit about this. Okay, so where do Asian Americans fit in conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace? Where do Asian Americans fit in questions about affirmative action and college admissions? Where do Asian Americans fit in terms of the conversation about the need to diversify New York City schools? And these are really, you know, complicated questions. Before this panel, I was just rereading Jay's piece about the Harvard admissions case, and just marveling at the nuance of it, because there are questions. For example, the specialized high school test in New York City, which de Blasio has said he wants to scrap, and for very good reasons. We need to do something about the diversity issues and the segregation in New York City schools. And the issue of segregation in New York City schools is much bigger than Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Tech, that specialized high school set of specialized high schools. But there has been a zeroing in on that issue and this question of eliminating the SSHAT. And they're just really complicated questions about, you know, actually something that's really surprising is the poorest minority group in New York City is actually Asians. So what does that do to the conversation? We have to get into sort of conversations about what is the difference between first generation immigrant poverty and generational poverty, and what are we have to get into, you know, issues of you know, just sort of trying to measure sort of differential impact. And what about race? What about class? What about education? So these are just really complicated questions. The thing I'll sort of end on was one of the things that was just really striking in Jay's piece that he wrote in 2019 about the Harvard admissions case was this issue that in the personal ratings where people measured sort of some of these qualities of Asian candidates, Asian candidates fared worse than other groups, than whites, and where does that sort of personal quality ratings, where does that sort of come from? And so those are the complicated things that we got to move on to. And I don't confess I have an answer on that. I'd be curious if Jay has been thinking about that in the last couple of weeks.
And I think we have to hit the whole model minority issue that faces Asians, the idea that you're the good ones. Of all the minorities, you're the ones that do good in school, you work hard, you have family, blah, blah. And this all came about back in the 60s when Black folks were out there fighting for civil rights. And it was like, they're the ones that are making trouble, and the Asians are the good ones. They have restaurants, we buy their food, they're quiet, they're respectful, and it has divided us for eternity. So who wants to take on that one? Where does the model minority fit in all of this? And who are we? Are we really counted among people of color?
Oh, I can go. I don't really know what that term means anymore, the model minority myth, and it's one that has always befuddled me because I've heard it, of course, my entire adult life, and I understand the mechanisms behind it, but I don't, I do think that perhaps it has taken on a bit too much uh, explanatory power, where everything that happens is sort of discussed through the model minority myth. And I think that in focusing so much on the model minority myth, that you actually do the opposite of what you're intending to do, which is that you're intending to say that, look, there are also Asians who are working class, right? There are also undocumented Asian Americans. There are people, here in the East Bay, in that are, like that have high incarceration rates, like the Cambodian population, that no East Asian person in media sort of theorizing about Asian Americans is ever thinking about them, right? And so to sort of, and I do think that when you say model minority myth, you've actually sort of recentered East Asian, successful, upwardly mobile, assimilating Asians once again, right? And then it's just about, well, what do we do about our problems? It's like, some level, like it doesn't, like maybe it's not that big of a deal. And so like, to sort of piggyback on what Mike was saying, or, the question that Mike asked, I think that, if there is any one prescriptive thing I would say about the coverage of this is that, like, I've been somewhat dismayed in the past week, or I don't think dismayed is the right word, but I've been somewhat troubled by how much of the coverage is about things like microaggressions, or people asking, like, big threads about, well, I didn't, this is sort of the emotional impact of me using an anglicized name instead of my Chinese name, or, um, this is sort of what happened to me at work. I think that those types of things are generally classified under like microaggressions or whatever, and that, they generally are spoken by and affect a large, mostly sort of upwardly upper middle class population. The people who are killed in these shootings are not from those backgrounds. People who have been attacked here in the Bay Area are not from those backgrounds. And I think that part of the way that I think journalists can help mitigate some of that sort of, like almost narcissism. I'll just say it's like a type of narcissism of a media and academic class of Asian Americans, is to go out and report on the actual populations, to remember things like, it is just as relevant that these were women, that some of them were sex workers, that that they had different immigration status, and then people whose, main takeaway from this would be about some sort of personal interaction. And I think that that's very hard, because I think that so much of our way of expressing identity as Asian Americans over the past 30 years has become routed into sort of, like interpersonal politics. And I don't know, like this, I mean, just reflects my general politics of the world, that I think that that sort of stuff, in the end, does sort of erase the actual conditions. And I think it's journalistically wrong to do that, because I think that if you write an essay about what happened in Georgia, and it is mostly about your conditions as like a upper middle class person who's elite educated, then you've missed the story. And so I've appreciate, and I don't, I actually think that the prestige media has been pretty good about this. Like I think the Times has been good. I think, Mike, I think the work that you guys have done at the New Yorker has been pretty good. Like I think, and on those lines, like, I think I see much less of the sort of expected stuff. And, I think that's I don't know. I think it's been positive. I think people have taken that very seriously. And in this instance, I think that, I don't know, I think the media is doing an all right job.
And there was an incredible story in the Times entitled "How to Protect Massage Workers." It was an opinion piece that really said that this is the time to have a discussion about what these workers really need, which is from us, the community, to write about their economic lack of security, the pain and suffering in their work. They have no safety. They are threatened by law enforcement. Give us free services or we'll report you. They can be deported for what they do. They have no safety. They have physical pain. There's rape. There's abuse. And I appreciate what you're saying, Jay, that the conversation needs to be reframed on that level to talk about the real community, the real community. Yes, the rest of us who are educated, we're the community too. But look at the statistics. 3/4 of adult Asian Americans are immigrants. Immigrants tend to be more conservative, and they tend to be more focused on, you know, the basics of life. What does that mean politically for us? If we keep talking about our trauma, which is real, what does that do in terms of the coverage of the community and helping the community to grow?
Yeah, go ahead, Jay. No, you should go.
Sophie, well, you know, I have found in my own reporting, you know, just to, I think, like I'm pretty transparent, or at least I try to be about, you know, my own background, which is that I'm also, you know, to end up where I am, I think you can guess what my background was too. You know, same upwardly ascendant, middle class family who ends up and going to elite schools. But you know, I have found that as a reporter reporting on immigrant communities, that a lot of the conversations I think that Asian Americans like myself have about Asian Americanness is completely divorced from the conversations that immigrant communities are having amongst themselves. I think this is certainly true with these attacks, right? But it's also true, of course, with you know, like Harvard admissions and the SHSAT, and you know, it has led to great frustration for me that where I feel like there is an attempt to almost wallpaper over, you know, the reality of what the Asian community, if such a thing exists, which I would generally argue it doesn't, but you know, like what the collection of Asian American people in this country actually believe. And yeah, I think that it's important to sort of demystify that, right? Because to not make it seem like we are all sort of, you know, good liberals who who support all these different causes, right? Like sort of a grab bag of causes that would put us in good graces with sort of multicultural elite. And I don't know. I think that that's a very difficult task because it requires a lot of foreign language reporters. It requires a lot of people who can follow WeChat. It follow, you know, and also like, you know, Chinese language, Korean language, you know, Vietnamese language media. And I just don't know if we're equipped to do that right now. As a, I don't know if we need more of me, you know, but I think we need more people who are very well versed in these communities and who can report on them and who understand them at a, you know, at sort of a lived level because they grew up in them. And I don't mean to say that like everyone should restructure their newsrooms in this sort of way, but if we're serious about covering this sort of stuff, then I think that that's what we need to do.
Yeah, we need more Sophias.
Right.
In our newsrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be very curious if you thought, if you've what you've been thinking as you've seen some of the coverage of the particularly the first generation immigrants, and it definitely was just on what Jay was saying. We did just and I'm not saying that this was the greatest piece in the world, but I thought it was a good idea and a good attempt at sort of capturing that the Asian community is not monolithic. Charles Bethea, who's a staff writer for The New Yorker who lives in Atlanta, our angle into that, or one of our angles into the piece was he attended a Korean Baptist church on this past Sunday. Actually, it was the Sunday before. And part of the reason he did that was there's a Korean language service and a second generation English speaking service, and the perspectives of the way that the two different congregations viewed the attacks was quite different, and that was just one way into the different types of conversations. But yeah, I'm curious, Sophia, if you've seen a difference in the channels that you follow.
Yes. So actually, I would like to speak on that from my personal experience because I am currently interning at New York Legal Assistance Group. So a lot of the clients that we have been helping with are actually from like very low income communities. So I would say like the language barrier is definitely a real thing, especially since like many of our clients are often like being like othered just because they don't actually understand what has happening and what they could do to either win a case or either like channel their concerns or discriminations they have received on a daily basis. So I would say just in general, I have been focusing on many articles like either from New Yorkers, New York Times, and like kind of social media posts. I think one thing we should definitely do is to try to do more features about like what real people have been thinking and what it really means to be either like an Asian or Asian American in a pandemic world. Because I think even though it's definitely a good thing to show more statistics and try to show like this kind of historical root of like anti-Asian like hate crimes in the American history, but I think we do also need people like people who are either from like Flushing or like who are just from like low income communities in New York in general to share either in their native language, or we can like help them to translate what they're saying or things like that to try to actually convey their stories to the mainstream media. So I think that's definitely something that we should consider about. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like we need to have a more bilingual, bicultural coverage instead of the elite, well-educated Asians that so many of us are after we come through these institutions. We need to address some of the questions in the chat, not the chat, the Q&A. Here's one. Where is that one that I was looking at? What should we East Asians do to make sure that we include South Asians, Southeast Asians, and Pacific Islanders in the Stop AAPI Hate conversation? And AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islanders. In other words, it's always about East Asians, is it? What about everybody else? Are they part of this conversation? Do they want to be? Does anybody want to be in this conversation?
I don't. Yeah, I think that perhaps this is a problem with the term itself, and I just think every time you say AAPI, like the PI part is an afterthought every time, and it's never been any different. And I think that we need to really examine whether or not the term actually connotes any type of real solidarity or any type of real connection outside of the spaces in which it has been codified, which is mostly the academy, right? And if it doesn't mean anything, then perhaps we should come up with a new organizing principle. That's all I'll say about that. Yeah.
Any suggestions?
My suggestion was to just sort of, use immigrant as a way to focus on the lives of working class people, and that I do not think that it is useful for people like myself to constantly harp about my own neurosis of belonging here in this country. I think that I think it's okay for writing, and I do enough of that in writing, but like if for political action, I think it needs to be really focused on working class people, and that really could lead to natural solidarity with Latino populations, with Black immigrant populations that does not exist right now. And AAPI as a group, if you talk about it, the people who are going to dominate that conversation every time, just like right now, right, are in this, you see the four faces in this Zoom, are going to be East Asian elites. And so, I don't know, like I'd just say maybe we shouldn't have this category anymore. Sorry, I don't mean to but that's my direct answer to a direct question. Yeah.
So that's a really important point because we've got so much baggage, so much based on jargon. If we can just strip away all of that and speak very simply, we can connect better with people.
Yeah, I love Jay's idea
because when you think about sort of the organizing principle of all this and what is, when you look at the through line of history, the thing that really that we need to hold on to and understand from history is that America has an exclusionary history, and that the change for those kinds of policies hasn't come from within. It's usually come from changes in sort of international relations and the global sort of stage. You know, why did the exclusion of Asians, the Chinese Exclusion Act, why did that finally get lifted in 1943? It wasn't something from within. It was obviously what was going on with World War II and China, you know, being allied with the U.S. In the Pacific War, and so many of these kinds of things are in history. These exclusionary policies in our immigration laws, the changes haven't come about, you know, because of some egalitarian spirit within America. And so I think that history and the kind of this history of xenophobia is what we're talking about, could be an orienting approach. I think you're on to something, Jay.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit, or do you want to try the next question?
We can go to the next question.
There's several of them that revolve around the idea of, this is about the reporters are from the community that is now in fear and trauma. If you're from the community, what does it do to your coverage? Do you personalize it? What happened to journalistic objectivity? Can you be trusted? And what does any of that even mean?
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I would say that I think that's, you know, wrong.
Which part is wrong?
I just think people can be objective even if they're from a community or from a group, you know. I find that all the controversy over these types of things, you know, you saw Black reporters in Pittsburgh excluded from covering protests in Pittsburgh because they were Black. I think that's monstrous, you know, and I think that the outrage over it was swift, and I think it was, you know, I don't think it changed much because there's only so much that outrage can do when you're dealing with industry that these are the norms. But I don't know. I would just quickly say no, you know, just be like, no.
No,
you know,
what?
they're just, no, I mean, no, I don't think that there's any compromise of objectivity, you know. I don't necessarily think that, you know, being from the group makes you better suited to report on that thing automatically, you know. And I do think that maybe we have a problem of over determining that type of stuff where Asian people just get asked to do Asian stuff and Black reporters get, you know, asked to do, you know, Black stories. Like I think that people are a little exhausted with that, but certainly the other way is like, you know, is way worse. You know, it's like where you can't do that because of that, right?
Do any of you live in fear, panelists? Do you fear for yourself? We have two young fathers with young daughters. Do you fear for them walking around in the container of a woman's body, Asian woman's body, mixed race girl's body?
So yeah, the other night I was coming back from 11 o'clock from playing tennis. Actually, I play tennis very late at night. It's the only time I can exercise. And I usually ride my city bike home, and and city bike was shut down for some reason after 11. So I texted my wife saying I'm walking home. The city bike is shut down. And she texted back, "Watch out for the wackos," that kind of thing. I think I did text her out of just a little bit of an abundance of caution, just to sort of say, like, you know, but like I said, I don't think it's confusing whether or not there really is something sort of what exactly is the level of newness here. That certainly is something new. I will say that my wife is definitely fearful, more fearful. I think my daughters are one's in elementary school and the other's in middle school, and I did ask them actually if they've encountered something, you know, anti-Asian kind of remarks and that kind of thing, which were obviously just a part of my upbringing growing up in suburban mostly white areas, and I was really heartened to hear that they hadn't heard anything specifically. Maybe that's partly because they haven't interacted with anybody really in more than a year. You know, my older daughter was with me when that. Well, both of my daughters were with me, but the older daughter was 7, so actually aware of what was going on when this happened on the street on the Upper East Side, in the open letter that I wrote about. And I did, you know, so for her, when she heard those remarks, that woman yelling, she was very confused and sort of just parsing the grammar of this woman. She's like, why did this woman say go back to China? We're not from China. She kept sort of rewinding the grammar of the sentence. And I was obviously thinking that the emotion of that moment for me came from thinking about what will, you know, my daughters feel, you know, in growing up in this country, and you know, will they feel that they belong, and who gets to define that? That was what I was thinking about in that moment, what I think about a lot in this moment that we're in.
Anyone else in the panel? Okay, here's another question. Do you think there is an idea of collective responsibility playing a role in attacks towards Asian Americans, especially COVID first appeared in China? Meaning what? That Asians are responsible for COVID? That Asians are responsible for what? Is there a collective responsibility? Are we?
I don't understand. We can go to the next question. I don't understand that question.
How do we stop, wait, where is it? How do we stop this discussion from devolving into oppression Olympics of sort and pursue means to battle white supremacy and anti-imperialism? Oppression Olympics, meaning it's a term that was coined by white feminists, meaning our group is suffering more than your group, and that group is, and then we're all pitted against each other. It implies there's an enemy, and that there's anti-imperialism and white supremacy. And where does that put us as journalists in how we view the world?
Well, yeah, that's where we get into you know, not a great area, obviously, trying to compare levels of systemic discrimination and structural racism. I mean, obviously, a lot of the discussion these days relates to addressing you know, very real facts in Asian American background, in terms of some of our parents were racist against other Asian groups, against Blacks, and there have been times in our history that we haven't been the greatest allies with the Black community, and I think there is something that we do have to think about in terms of you know, the intersectionality and the fact that a lot of this does just sort of circle back to this issue of the poisonous tree of white supremacy in the country. I hate to use the phrase because it's just sort of tossed out there a little bit. But it does, when I think about, when I think about this, the Asian context in American history, it does relate to this, as I mentioned the phrase before, this sort of exclusionary history of America. And we have been victimized in that. And that's one of the useful things I think about this moment is sort of a re-education about that history. I think one sort of useful thing is that when you look back at that history, Asian Americans have secured some of these kinds of rights, and were part of the advancement of civil rights in this country. When you think about birthright citizenship, it was a case involving a Chinese immigrant who was barred from re-entry into the United States. This is the case of Wong Kim Ark, who was born in the United States, and then when his case, when he was denied entry, went all the way to the Supreme Court and confirmed the 14th Amendment provision of jus soli, that if you were born in this country, that you are a citizen. Another case was the case involving the Chinese laundries, and the case of Yik Wo, that where this was a case where the first time, I think it was, that a law that was written in a ostensibly race-neutral way was found to have unequal impact, and therefore was thrown out. Those are really sort of important advances in our constitutional history, and kind of make clear that we're all in this together. That these kinds of advances for Blacks and for Asians are kind of mutually beneficial.
Here's another question. Building on that, what does the conversation about building solidarity across identity groups look like for each of you and your respective communities? How do we cross communities to reach out and build solidarity? And there's a comment in the chat that goes back to what Jay was saying. If our coverage is really going to change, and we were just talking about fear, we got to go ask a working class person with low English who commutes on the New York City subway every day or night if they're afraid. Those are the people we need to be talking to about fear.
Well, I think, solidarity comes out of shared struggle, right? And I think that one of the, if you look at the history of Asian America, there's this moment that is sort of discussed, at length in by Asian American studies professors about third world liberation and, the AAPA, and sort of the moment in which there was a big multiracial coalition of people fighting to have ethnic studies at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley. Now, I have a lot of, I have many feelings about that sort of centrality of that story, in part because it's such a small portion of people that you're really talking about, and it's been sort of inflated to mean everything, right? But I do understand why it has been so focused upon, because it is one example of the world that people want, right? Where people are sort of joining together across identity lines to fight for one thing. Now, you can ask, like, is ethnic studies at UC Berkeley and at San Francisco State really the type of thing that we should all be fighting for at all times? I think most people would say it seems not so important. But I think that generally, if you try and find shared struggle, right, then you can build solidarity. And once again, I just think that shared struggle needs to be something that's authentic, that's lived. And I don't think that the way in which Asian American advocacy has gone for the past 20 years or so is focused on that. I think it's more focused on, how do I eliminate these sort of barriers towards my own success, right? How do I feel more American, which translates to how do I feel more white? And I do think that some of the things that happened this summer, including like Ivy League I talk about this a lot, but like Ivy League students writing letters home to sort of deal with anti-Blackness in their families and their communities, I think that's commendable. But I also wonder what the impulse for that is, right? Is it a desire for very upwardly mobile, very successful young Asian people to sort of say, hey, I'm really distancing myself from this community, you know? I am not like them, right? Is it a way to sort of purify one's self from sort of the fobs among us that they're ashamed of, right? And is that a way of sort of being like, okay, through this social justice channel, I will become white, right? That's what it seems like to me. And I don't think that, I think that that's at least part of it. And I don't think that you can build solidarity that way. I don't think it can be gestural. I don't think that it can be, hey, I'm not against you, even though my mom is, you know, like my mom is terrible, but because then, you know, it's really just about creating an elite that's multicultural at that point. That's not real solidarity. So I once again, I just think that, you know, the way that I've put it is that like people like me should should commit treason against Asian American, which is a sort of takeoff on Noel Ignatieff, who's one of my mentors, is white people should commit treason against the white race, right? I think that it is on us to sort of put aside the former way of talking about these things and to figure out a new way that's rooted in the lives of the people who are actually affected by these attacks. And we're all affected by these attacks, but who is more likely to be attacked, right? And do you think about that person when you think about Asian America is a question I think you can start from. And I think once the struggle is highlighted, then I think that the pathways to solidarity will be much easier to access. But I don't think you can think your way through it. I just think it takes a lot of organizing work and a lot of, you know, yeah, I think it just takes a lot of community one-to-one work. And that stuff is slow and it's hard and it's difficult. So yeah.
Okay, what are other examples of committing treason against the Asian American community?
Well, I think it just means that one should abandon, you know, the centrality of East Asian successful people, you know? And we had 10 years of talking about Hollywood representation, right? We have prominent Asian American people writing, like giving quotes in the Washington Post saying that Asian Americans were at the cusp of being recognized after Crazy Rich Asians and fresh off the boat. And it's like, that sort of stuff is like, to me personally, you know, I just think it's destructive because it what is the community that you're talking about then? Like what is like the actual concerns of the community, because they don't have a movie about them, right? There are much bigger problems that if you ask anybody, like the people that they're talking about, like people collecting cans in San Francisco, do you think that their like sort of sense of security in this country is dependent on Crazy Rich Asians? Like that is like a horrific thing to say, I think. So I think that it, you know, for I don't think I always have the most productive methods of doing it. Mostly, a lot of it is like online trolling, but like, you know, there needs to be some sort of reckoning, I think. And I think that that reckoning has to be serious. And the reorientation has to be serious. And I think that's what I mean by treason. Mike, that's a great question. You know, I could just float out these. it's like, why is Mike asking me this follow-up question? I don't.
We've got like 3 minutes. We got like 3 minutes left. See if we can hit some of these really quick. What mistakes do you see the media, specifically non-Asian newsroom leaders, making as they try to cover this story? What mistakes are the non-Asian newsroom leaders making? And we want to hear more from Sophia.
Yeah.
Wow. So I would think that's definitely a good question. And I think one mistake that I can think of is like whether like how objective we should be, because I think this actually has been a point that was mentioned before, but I think it's very important to actually make a balance, how to strike a balance between being objective when reporting the the racial minorities and how to add more emotions to actually show like why this really matters to the general readers. And I feel like that may be something we should think more about.
To get general readers to care more?
Yeah.
And what would those stories look like? Would it be what Jay's talking about, getting down to the level of what people need and care?
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
So what story in this whole thing that's happening do each of you want to cover?
I'm still sorting that out, you know. I don't know. It's I think that the activism communities that are going to come up out of it and the creation of what an identity will be are interesting to me, and especially the reactionary communities that are going to come out of it. I think that there will be a reactionary politics that comes out of it that will dwarf the sort of attempts at, you know, solidarity and everything like that. And I find that to be totally depressing for me personally, politically, but I do think that it's going to happen and is happening right now. And so, you know, people are very good at organizing now, especially over, you know, chat apps and everything like that. And you know, like, what is the future of Asian American politics going to look like? Is something that I'm super interested in. You know, will it be anti-racist or progressive as it has been, or will it trend completely in the other direction? Is what I'm interested in.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, Jay wrote about this in his piece for the Times, and I thought it was really smart. And I thought maybe that's where he was heading with the committing treason thing. I mean, basically, there is a very complicated politics that is happening here in the Asian community, and as Jay wrote about, if Democrats aren't careful about it, Asian Americans are going to trend in a sort of a nationalistic sort of way on this, and there is sort of like a possibility of Asian Americans sort of jumping onto the sort of anti-woke sort of movement on this, and that's really interesting and complicated, so I do think that in general, where my head is where what's the sort of what's next? Where does this sort of this outcry and all these rallies that are happening, like that happened this weekend, where does that head next? In politics, in the way we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, the way we think about all these sort of big issues that I mentioned before about college admissions, the segregation in schools. Where does this conversation sort of move next in those really difficult to talk about places?
Thank you, all of you, for being here. Sophia, can you please put your Instagram, the coalition's Instagram user handle there so that people can keep talking to you about what's going on? And if either of you have anything Jay and Mike, if you'd like to include something there where we can follow you, that'd be nice. I'm going to put
in the chat.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat. And then I'm also putting in the link to our department's diversity page, which is run by our wonderful chair, Yvonne Laddie, who put this whole thing together like this. I don't know how she did it. And Rachel Swarms, who worked with her. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. This was such a great conversation. I'm very moved, and I look forward to us all talking more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.